however you want to manage the time. So,
Great. So I just got a note, and I apologize for looking at my phone here, that Commissioner Tierney doesn't have audio. I'm not sure if she can hear us. Is there?
thank you. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can hear that from our end. Let's just hold for a moment.
No, she's not. I'm trying.
There we
So
go.
let's try that. Good morning, Commissioner Tierney. Can you hear us and can we hear you?
No.
Can you give us a wave if you can hear the committee? So she can't hear the committee. Not sure why that is, just.
I can't text her back and tell her we're trying, so wait a minute. I can't do it.
I did just send her a message, let her know that we're trying.
Yeah, okay.
This is what happened to me the other night at the county.
She looks unmuted now. I think it's just Bethel. She's unmuted.
No,
on
she's
her.
fine.
Yeah, I don't, but clearly, it seems like she's not hearing us.
She is unmuted from us.
You know, sometimes we cure this by calling back in,
Oh, yeah.
maybe suggesting she just,
Except that we have unmuted her. I don't know. Calling it.
well,
So,
Oh, she's making.
can you hear us? No.
okay.
Sure,
So-
great. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Can you put a hand up and let me know whether you hear me?
Now we got it. So
Okay, you hear me. I just don't hear you on my end.
you don't hear us yet?
Um,
All right, so. Yeah, I think maybe we should just drop it.
I can try dialing back in.
Yeah.
Shall I do that? Okay, thank you.
Trying to hear it that way. It's like restarting your computer. It's like,
Right.
that's why it hears something, but sometimes it does. So. we'll Pause for a moment.
It is with young people, when the computer doesn't work, everyone feels that the computer doesn't work. When it's old people, they make fun of you. Zoom, it's your fault.
Have you experienced this often?
No, I won't lie, I've picked on it mercilessly.
I know how to unmute, you know.
She's, Commissioner Tierney's reappearing. Let's see what happens.
She's not on speakerphone now.
So it looks to me like I'm back, but I still don't hear anything in the room.
We hear you. Can you hear us? Actually, not, and we don't have a video.
In the YouTube live, can they hear us, or is it on our end, or?
No, YouTube Live.
Chair, I'm going to try one more thing. I'll see if I can get an audio feed from YouTube so that we can combine the two and perhaps function that way. If not, then my recommendation would be that Director Poor simply present the slide that I was going to present, which is the overview of the department, unless you would like me to speak without having benefit of audio. Let me see if I can get something through YouTube.
Cell phone version.
Run the video.
Let's see if anything changes. So we're waiting for anyone who's on the YouTube version of this. We're waiting to see if Commissioner Tierney can get an audio signal in a second way. And we have her on video link for the committee. So Commissioner Tierney, I don't know if you can hear us. Apparently not. I think unfortunately YouTube follows by like 15 seconds or something. So it could be a very stilted conversation.
So I now have video of you on YouTube as well.
Pretty exciting program.
I do now have sound.
So you can hear us?
Okay.
I can hear you now, yes.
Ready?
Good.
All right,
I
so
think we have liftoff.
thanks for hanging in there, helping get over technology hurdles.
Not at all.
And so with that, Commissioner Tierney, could you, introduce yourself, your team, and kick us off? So nice to see you again at the beginning of a new biennium.
Absolutely, and many familiar faces in the room, some new faces in the room, but I do understand fully that the new faces are not new to the work we do. So it's a pleasure to have you on board.
Sure. And on your cue, why don't we introduce ourselves, starting with Dr. White.
Hi, I'm Rebecca White, and I'm the state senator for Windsor County, and I have she, her pronouns.
And congratulations on your election, Senator White.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Good morning, Senator McDonald, your senator from Orange County.
I believe we've met before, Senator. It's good to see you. Glad to see you're in good health.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chris Bray from Addison Senate District.
Always a pleasure.
Senator Ann Watson from the Washington District.
This is a new one for me, former mayor, I believe, and
Yes.
congratulations as well on your election.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Dick McCormick, your old pal and former neighbor.
Indeed. And you served me so well, Dick. Good to see you, sir.
So floor is yours, Commissioner.
Excellent. Let me not take too much time because the folks in the room with you are two of the finest professionals I've ever had the pleasure to work with, Director Poor and Director Bailey, both of whom will brief you on the particulars of the business of the agency. I'm sorry to say that Jim Porter, the Director for Public Advocacy, could not be with us today. He's had a family matter that came up at the last minute that he needs to deal with, so I will speak very briefly to his function. And I encourage Senator Watson and Senator White to follow up with us after this presentation if you like to get further detail about the agency. We're always pleased to entertain queries and conversation with any one of you. TJ, could you go to the first slide, please, which has the mission statement of the department on it?
Yes, I think Ms. Newman is pulling that up now. So that the next slide there, great. If you could advance one slide.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. So I was taught a million years ago in my audiovisual class in briefing not to read slides to people, so I won't do that. But just loosely speaking, if you think energy, you think telecommunications, if you think public advocacy on either one of those subjects, whether it's economic in the form of rate setting for our utilities or advocating about rules governing net metering, planning that we do and public interest work connected with that, regional advocacy about our grid, or if you think about telecommunications, which I won't spend a lot of time on here today, that is the department. We speak for the public, we listen to the public above all, and we try very hard to support you in your work as you write laws that govern the world of regulating energy and telecommunications, wastewater, water, and the like. I should have started by introducing myself as June Tierney, the Commissioner of the Department. I've been with you now for many years in different forms, first as a staff attorney at the department beginning over 20 years ago, then moving on to be a hearing officer at the Public Utility Commission, before then being promoted to serve as their general counsel for 5 years or thereabouts. And then Governor Scott made the judgment or error in judgment, depending on how you see it, to appoint me the commissioner of the Department of Public Service. And the benefit of that arc, if you will, is that I came to the agency those many years ago with more than a passing acquaintance with the work of the agency as well as the staff. And in that time, I've had great pleasure working with many professionals, but none more so than TJ Poor and Melissa Bailey. If we could move on to the next slide, please, TJ. This is an overview of how we are organized at the leadership level and also subject matter wise. Very briefly, in my office, you see that I have a dotted line to the Vermont Community Broadband Board. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, except to let you know that they are alive and well, doing great work. They are embedded with us administratively. Director Hallquist and I work together hand in hand on their mission, which is to bring broadband to everybody using substantial federal funding that we now have. I'm highlighting this only because on paper, it looks like I have this unit in my agency. On paper, meaning the statute that you wrote, they are entirely independent except for administrative services. The reality is the agency spends a lot of time working with VCBB, and that is an unfunded mandate, if you will. We are happy to do it, but it does illustrate how the tendency can be to ask the department to take on new missions, which we are always glad to do, without necessarily assigning the requisite resources to do it. And that is becoming important increasingly in our work, because so much of the work now that we're doing, whether it's under the Global Warming Solutions Act or under the regional work that we have to do in working with our fellow New England states, a lot of that work has been absorbed at the department without additional resources. I would just ask you folks to keep that in mind. An example of what we're talking about is I do technically on my manpower chart have a deputy commissioner position, but that deputy commissioner position is vacant right now and has been for some time, because I felt it was more important to try to secure additional resources for our planning division and our energy efficiency resources division in the form of an analyst who could help us with modeling work that we do in support of the climate action plan, the comprehensive energy plan, and other activities. This is by way of illustrating that within the agency, I do take positions and repurpose them as best I can. One of the moves that we've made that I'm very proud of, and I'm sure TJ will talk about more, is that in the last year, we have created a position for an equity and data manager. And this person's job is to make sure that everything that the department does is vetted through an equity lens, and that we are increasingly using data in new ways in order to inform our policy decisions. Going down the chain a little more, as I mentioned a moment ago, Jim Porter's not with us today, but he has in his charge a separate unit that is dedicated to finance and economics that support our rate case advocacy. This is different from the economics analysis that is done in our planning division under Director Poor, and some of the economics work that is also done in the efficiency and energy resources division. And the way to think of it is the finance and econ unit in the public advocacy division is a sort of check, if you will, on the reality of who pays for the policies that we assess economically in the planning and the efficiency division. Mr. Porter has about, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, I hear a question.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you hear. You know, I just wanted to respond briefly. I hope that it's been your experience that this committee has, whenever we ask any operating area to take on work, that we encourage them to let us know what if that workload is manageable with current staff, if more staff is required. We don't just expect operating areas to stretch thinner and thinner, because that's not really a recipe to help you succeed. So we don't succeed without you. So if there is a need for more staff, I hope you'll let this committee know. And I think we always go to the Appropriations Committee in support of operating areas that need staffing in order to take on and deliver on work that is often the legislatures ask for. So we don't want you feeling unsupported.
No, not at all. I think you're quite right that your committee has been very receptive. As you also know, at the end of the day, what comes out when the line is drawn under the session is not always the same as what you folks do in your committee as well. But the strategy has to be to start with raising awareness, and that is what I'm doing here. I'm pressing the point because there's been an enormous expansion of work at the department. And however it may have happened, the bottom line is we have spent enormous hours on the climate action plan, for instance, with no additional resources. And so that's something for if you can really focus on that, Senator Bray, as we move through this session and consider the resources needed at the department. I'm happy to talk with you about what those resource needs are and with your committee as well. But it starts with reminding folks that every time that there is a significant additional responsibility added to the department's mission, the existing resources are not able to absorb that, is my point. That's all.
Okay, and then for our side, we're happy to support a request for additional resource.
Much
But
appreciated.
we can't really make it on your behalf without,
Yes,
guidance from you as to what resource you need.
we agree. We agree. And we have made our needs known in the past. They just haven't always been met. And that's called hard luck in life, I think. But anyway, if I may proceed.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go back to that that overview chart for a moment, TJ? Thank you. So I just wanted to point out that we also are home to the Clean Energy Development Fund, and you have a colleague, Senator Perchlik, who is on legislative leave from our agency to serve with you in the ranks. And I think beyond that, we also have a vacancy right now in our telecom division. I don't believe telecom is jurisdictional to this committee, but I'm just pointing it out because, as you can see, Mr. Porter is serving as the interim telecom director pending recruitment for that position. You see contact information as well here. Please feel free to contact us anytime you think we can help you inform a question that you are weighing. With that, I'm now going to turn the matter over to TJ to brief you on the particulars of what his planning division does.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for the record, TJ Poor, I'm the Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. And we're going to focus, Melissa and I will focus on the Planning and Efficiency and Energy Resources Division, really because that is where most of the work that is jurisdictional to you all lies. Commissioner Tierney described some of the other areas. And I want to start with the comprehensive energy plan. I did bring some copies of the executive summary. If you all are interested in having a full copy, hard copy of the plan, you are welcome to it. I didn't bring them because 5 copies would be heavy. It won't hurt my back on the way over. So just let me know. I've been in and out of the department. I started in the efficiency world at the department about 15 years ago, and I worked in the planning department as a staffer before going to manage the power supply for municipal utilities in the state with Vermont Public Power Supply Authority for several years. I came back as Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources, and last year switched to be the Director of Planning. Our energy plan, we do this every 6 years. The January 2022 plan coincided with the climate action plan development, and the plans are designed to be consistent with and talk to one another. The energy plan itself is driven by 30 VSA 202A, which outlines Vermont's energy policy, and that statute requires that energy policy be affordable, sustainable, cost-effective, and meet our greenhouse gas requirements. And the energy plan attempts to balance those different priorities as it reestablishes the target for 90% renewable across all energy sources by 2050. There's 2 main themes in this energy plan that are different than last ones. The first is equitable transitions, ensuring that the benefits and the burdens of energy policy are shared or equitably distributed. Commissioner Tierney mentioned the equity and data policy manager. I won't say much more about that we've added to further kind of our thinking and our policy in this area, not to kind of do all the work, but to help to help all of us as we do our work, kind of keep equity and just transitions in mind. The other theme is grid evolution, so ensuring our electric system can handle the distributed energy resources, both on the supply side, distributed generation, and the demand side, the electro technologies that are coming online that are to ensure the system can handle those as we move towards meeting our targets. Every year, we publish an annual energy report on the 15th of January. So next week we will have that in hand. I hope we can come back and talk about that and provide an overview. It includes a net metering report specific to net metering, includes a report on the renewable energy standard as well, and a lot of statistics and data just about our energy system.
And sorry to interrupt, we also just received from you folks the 2022 Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Annual Report. So we'll put that up on our website, and community members, if you want a hard copy, we'll get that to you as well. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you. Also, as part of the plan, I should mention, we spend a lot of time on providing guidance for regional planning commissions and municipalities under Act 174 of 2016, which establishes planning standards. Our guidance establishes planning standards that allow local governments to have more control over siting of resources in their towns, so that they can get substantial deference in the commission siting process if they have an approved plan, and we provide guidance for that.
Mr. Ford, so when we first did that act, we had, I think, 3 years running support for municipalities and RPCs, and that's not really now in the department, to help towns figure out how to do that. I don't know if we're still funding that, or if there's a need to continue to fund that effort, or that's now become kind of routine and it's just part of normal operations.
I would say that the commissions and municipalities are still looking for resources. I'll talk a little bit about our renewable energy program engagement, where we're looking to help help support the commissions and municipalities in getting the word out and getting participation in our energy policy making going forward, and looking to support that with funding. I believe we're also looking into, if we haven't already, Melissa, you may be able to speak more to this, about providing direct resources to continue that support. Next slide, please. The planning division really oversees electricity policy and programs on the wholesale side, including the renewable energy standard, the standard offer program, and net metering. And the energy plan, as well as the climate action plan, calls for a wholesale reconsideration of our renewable electricity policies, really recognizing that these current programs were developed as one-offs in silos. As we move towards and consider whether to go 100% carbon free or 100% renewable in our electricity supply, that we really need to look at all of our programs and have a comprehensive electricity and renewable policy going forward. And so to this end, if you could go to the next slide, please, we've initiated a public engagement process. And so this really puts in action the spirit of Act 154, which was the environmental justice bill that you all passed last year. And it has the goal of really reaching a broader array of Vermonters. So not just the usual suspects in making our energy policy, but that are already kind of deeply engaged in the conversation. But we want to try and create spaces for people to be heard while moving transparently to build policy. I think of this as instead of building the policy and kind of publishing it and saying, hey, what do you think? And really losing everybody at kind of Appendix A or acronyms or technical language, which has often been the current process. We're looking to ask, here's the current state of things. What is important to you as we build policy, and then build those and say, did we get it right? And come back. And so kind of have that arc of process. To do that, we issued over the summer a request for input, recognizing that this is not the best way to get to everybody, but to say how should we engage, and what kind of time frame should we engage over, and who should we engage? And we built this public engagement plan with that sort of feedback. And the weight of those comments looked for kind of a process that took the time to actually hear from voices of Vermonters. And so I won't read the goals here that are up on the slide. I generally covered them, but just it's really, we're trying to lift up voices of Vermonters. And I can go, there's an appendix slide to this deck. We can come back another time to talk about the public engagement plan and the process, but I'll just start by noting the first phase of it is an educational phase, where we're planning some educational webinars for later this month in early February to kind of set the stage and build that knowledge so we're all speaking the same language.
So if we have time, we'll get to that slide in the end. When does the public engagement plan process conclude with a recommendation? Who's the recommendation go to?
The recommendation would come in the fall of this year. So we're trying to build this process to have recommendations in time for you all to take action in the 2024 session.
Thank you.
Next slide, thank you. So I mentioned grid evolution as a theme of the energy plan. And so our planning division is also responsible for reviewing integrated resource, transmission, and distribution planning on a number of levels. So locally, that's ensuring the decision-making framework of our utilities are reasonable, considering kind of the changing landscape through that they're operating in. And we do that through a number of areas. That includes the Vermont System Planning Committee, which is a group of stakeholders, utilities, Renewable Energy Vermont, developers, and public stakeholders that are appointed by the Public Utility Commission to talk about the grid itself, focusing on transmission, but also distribution. We review integrated resource plans, alternative regulation plans of utilities where they have innovation programs and their innovative tariffs. On a broader level, we also coordinate how that fits, how the local planning fits into the regional planning, the regional grid in which we operate through multi-state collaborations and participation in ISO New England committees.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So a major power supplier for Vermont is Hydro-Quebec outside ISO. So how do you integrate ISO's, how do you integrate HQ's role into your ISO picture?
Right, so they're sourced outside of New England, obviously, but they import into New England, and ISO New England kind of manages the power supply coming in at that import spot. So the big one coming directly into Vermont is at Highgate, a couple hundred megawatts coming in there, and that is where there's a converter from it changing from DC direct current power to the alternating current that can be used on the grid. That's the point of interconnection for ISO New England and where it is imported. So then it just looks like any other generator in New England at that point. And similarly for interconnection points in the rest of New England. I do want to mention the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. Sorry, I had to look at the the federal funding that was passed in the past 18 months, because it helps in this regard in terms of grid investments. And just a number of areas where funding is coming through the department or going after funding includes there's some Formula State Energy Program grants that support electric transmission and distribution planning. That is as well as other programs. That's $3 million over 5 years, where we've submitted an application to the Department of Energy to get that formula funding. There's the Efficiency Conservation Block Program and the Revolving Loan Fund Capitalization Grant Program. Those two programs were, on our suggestion, appropriated to Buildings and General Services to support the State Energy Management Program, which is in turn helping municipalities. It's expanding to help municipalities make investments in not only grid investments, storage is eligible, but energy efficiency and other energy saving investments. Generation is also eligible. Then there's a Grid Resilient State Formula Grant, where we're applying for funds from the Department of Energy to reduce the number and duration of utility outages. I don't have the funding on there, but that's about $3 million a year for 5 years, where we will then in turn issue a solicitation to our utilities, who are the eligible subrecipients, to make grid investments to help reduce outages. And then there's competitive solicitations. There's the GRIP program. It's the Grid Resilience Infrastructure Program in particular, is one we're working on right now, where there's concept papers due at the end of the week, where we're working with utilities to actually put in concept papers to secure potentially hundreds of millions of dollars for Vermont to do transformational work on grid resilience, including potential storage, whether it be short duration storage or actually longer duration, and really the orchestration across all 3 levels, which is a little unique in Vermont, where we can do the transmission distribution level and the home level, given the nature of our utilities.
Okay, great. I have a big picture question that anyone, I get asked this all the time when we talk about decarbonizing thermal and transportation. And the question is, with our current grid, how long before we start to run into constraints if we continue to electrify heating and transportation loads? And then just brief, I mean, this could be a big conversation, but if you could something on that, and then what's the process so that we don't actually ever hit a wall?
Right. So the short answer is it depends. It depends on the transmission level. We have some amount of headroom in the our peak load in the summer is around 950 megawatts, and according to Belco, we have some headroom up to almost 1,200 megawatts, and then in the winter, that headroom is more due to the thermal loading of the lines can be higher in the winter. But on the distribution level, it could be as soon as now, depending on the circuit level. So there could be a circuit that is already, depending on which type of distributed energy resource you're talking about, it could be oversaturated with generation, or it could be oversaturated with demand. And on the demand side, I think we've had a long history of targeting those constraints, and I think those are actually less of a concern. I think the immediate concern are the constraints on more on the generation side. Now and as we go forward, that could change, right? But I think on the generation side, we're doing a good job. Ultimately, when a generator sites, and it's located and has a contract, or wants to put power on the grid, and upgrades need to be made to if upgrades need to be made to the system, that is paid by the developer right now. But ultimately, if the developer wants to, sell that power and make a reasonable return, in order to actually make an investment in the project, they're going to incorporate that charge in whatever they're charging for that power to the utility. And so ultimately,
I don't understand what the developer refers to.
oh, sorry, the developer is the entity who is actually building citing a solar project or a generation project. So that could be, it could be a private company, it could be the utility, all right, in certain instances. Ultimately, those costs end up getting passed through to ratepayers because, the person building the plant needs to get, compensated for building the plant, and then will charge the price that needs to be paid in order to kind of actually build the project. And the ratepayers will ultimately pay for that if there's an agreement or if it's a state mandated project. So I think the goal is to really try and plan in advance. And so our integrated resource planning and that our utilities are doing with our guidance and oversight, and it is really kind of pushing towards that. So like, let's try and figure out the best way forward in order to minimize those additional costs for everyone, because ultimately the ratepayers are always the ones that end up paying.
So we should, I think we're getting started, and our first bill we're working on is affordable heat, but it'd be good for us later in the session to come back to it so that we understand better that the many things we're trying to do to help people decrease emissions, that they fit into a plan that I'm sure you're all working on. I have a cost-effective evolution of the grid for utilities about a year ago, I think it was, came up with an estimate of total grid investments, and it's something like $2 billion. I think it's been pared down since then, but we might need large investments in order to keep online.
Right. And we're at a time of great opportunity too, with federal funding available. It's some of the competitive solicitations that we're going after to try and continue to enhance our grid, which is good. I don't want to right now. I don't want to say that raise a flag and say that we're in dire situation here, because I think we are moving in the right direction and we're making good investments in our grid.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any barriers to you accessing federal funds in the way that our renewable energy standard are there any barriers to getting these federal funds to do some of the work that you've identified?
Not policy barriers. I think there's if I'm honest, there's a resource barrier. With everything going on, it's challenging to say, hey, especially when the Department of Energy deadlines are short. Like this grid resilience one, we're putting things aside to kind of go after this, but we're also doing it. But policy-wise, I think a lot of our policies, a lot of our structures that are in place, our integrated resource planning, our Vermont System Planning Committee have actually been a real value in actually going after competitive funds with the Department of Energy. It creates a system where we can collaborate really effectively within all the entities in the state, which I don't want to harp on kind of Vermont being unique, but Vermont is unique in that we are small and we work together and collaborate in a way that other states do not.
I'm sorry.
I just my fault. So just to be clear, when you say capacity, you mean staffing?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is going back a topic slightly, but in terms of the public engagement process with the report that you anticipate coming back with, on the continuum of grade sizes, highest recommendations that you could come back with, on the one end being like, we want you to make it as cheap as possible with as much renewable sources as possible, just big statements versus like, you should develop a program that has these specific aspects or elements. Where in that continuum do you anticipate falling with the report?
Well, part of it depends on what we hear from in the process, but I would like to have recommendations that talk about kind of the next iterations of what net metering should be, if there should be a centralized procurement like the standard offer, and if so, what it should look like. And also, address issues like in-state versus out-of-state generation, which that I think that time and location, there's in-state, out-of-state for location in the state, time, location, but also the time of generation and matching that with supply. I think those are some big categories that we hope to be able to address in this process.
Thank you.
Okay, I have just one more fast slide, just because we do a whole lot more also in the planning division. Anytime there's a project that's getting cited, our group reviews that to ensure it promotes the general good of the state under 30 VSA 248. Renewable energy standard compliance on the power supply tiers 1 and 2 fall in the planning division. Reviewing rate cases, utility rate cases, which there's been a lot of recently, and we could go into probably another day on why that is and how our utilities are seeing the impacts of the regional and world events. And Commissioner Tierney mentioned the Clean Energy Development Fund. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa Bailey, who's the director
TJ,
of Division of Energy Resources.
Just one comment before we go to Melissa. I just want to make sure that Senator Watson and Senator White are aware, if they're not already, that Vermont remains unique in the region in that it continues to have vertical integration of its utilities, as opposed to the other New England states that do not. And what that means for purposes of today's presentation is that we are much better positioned in Vermont to work efficiently and quickly when it comes to going after things like competitive funding at DOE, because we have better command and control, if you will, over the distribution utilities, and they in turn, as owners of Velco, work hand in glove with our transmission company. So there's an unusual degree of being able to target funding, such as what we're doing right now with GRIP, which is to promote the New England Clean Power Link, a project that's been certificated, approved by the PUC for 6 years now, and looking for a home so that it can actually be built. That's the kind of, to Senator Bray's question earlier about are there barriers, or I think that was perhaps your question, Senator Watson, are there barriers and the like? Quite to the contrary, I think Vermont's done just about everything it can to make it feasible for this small state to effectively advocate for access to federal funding and the like. But as TJ pointed out, capacity in terms of staffing remains the issue. And alone in that space, it's, for instance, not clear that the federal funding is necessarily available for funding positions. Happily, we are able to use some of the state energy office funding that you'll hear from Director Bailey about in a moment to supplement our staffing, but it's not near what's needed. That's all I had.
I expect back to the whole, it takes money to make money, or it takes money to save money.
Right.
Indeed, indeed.
Switch slides to
Senator McDonald?
I have a question.
sorry.
Just, it had to do with efficiency utilities, and we have the Efficiency Vermont program, et cetera, which we call a utility, and we call it a utility because its work makes more electricity available through efficiencies. What's the last year for which we have a number of how much it costs per kilowatt hour for the electricity produced by the efficiency utilities.
I'm gonna defer to our Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources, Ms. Bailey.
Sure, and I can pull a more precise number, but I believe that we're in the process of modeling Efficiency Vermont's budget going forward. I think it's in the range of 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour for their load reductions that are provided by the efficiency utility.
I know it's technically, you don't produce electricity, you save, you do more, you've come up with ways for homeowners, commercial, industrial properties to get more work through, by producing more, that get electricity to do more work with less electricity.
Yes, exactly. And we look at that as an alternative to purchasing the power.
What's the last year for which you can measure the amount of additional work as a kilowatt hours worth of work that you have, that the utility has produced?
The last year that we have data for would be 2021.
And what is the average kilowatt hour reduction?
Sorry, are you looking for the kWh rather than the rate? The amount of electricity savings?
Efficiency Vermont produces, and I'm using air quotes, electricity. It makes, it does more work with less electricity. What is the numerical measure, the cost of the benefit of the electricity that you produce through Efficiency Vermont work?
I would have to get back to you. You're looking at what is the financial value of the benefits that Efficiency Vermont delivers?
Yep.
I would have to get back to you on that number.
Okay, but that's, so that's what you do, and you, if we all believe, support the notion of new motors, different pumps, different motors, different fans, different light bulbs, because it is cheaper than buying electricity to operate the old motors, plants, fans, and light bulbs.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us your most recent savings for the most recent year that you have the number for measured in kilowatt hours?
Not off the top of my head, and I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking. So there's two different ways to measure the benefits of the efficiency utility, right? I can talk about their budgets. And so there's the benefit they deliver per dollar of investment. Sounds like that's what you're looking for, the financial value. And even within value, there's a couple different ways to measure
It's
that.
a benefit per dollar investment. And the notion is that when the money is invested, customers who buy electricity don't have to buy as much. And the value of what they don't have to buy is measured in kilowatt hours, that they no longer have to buy this many kilowatt hours to fry an egg.
So I'm just trying to make sure I follow this
Please, help
question.
me.
Well, I'm just wondering if, so we sometimes talk about how many dollars invested and how many dollars saved. Like, we had that figure the other day, from 2000 to 2020, $709 million of energy efficiency charges collected, and lifetime savings for that investment was 2.8 billion, I think was the last rounded figures I saw from Efficiency Vermont. So are you looking for dollar
Yes.
savings?
How much is the savings per kilowatt hour of electricity that has been, instead of the enterprise having to spend this amount of money to fry an egg, now how much money do they have? How much less does it cost them to fry an egg in the electric frying pan? How much less does it cost them to pump water up from a well? How much less?
Do your savings figures include the reduced load, so our regional network services charge is also reduced because we're smaller load within ISO, or when you do that math, you include all the savings? Not just
Yes.
household level, but like system level.
Yes, system benefits is what we typically would measure, and that's when you're talking about the benefits, I just want to be clear that there are different types of benefits that we can talk about. There's something called total resource benefits that would incorporate fossil fuel reductions, greenhouse gas reductions, water savings and other things. And then there's the strictly electric system benefits. And so there are a few different numbers that I can provide in follow-up, but I want to be clear that it's not quite as easy as saying what's the benefit. It depends on which benefit you're after.
Is that helpful?
Mr. Chair, we believe it is correct that in the last 22 years, we have gone here in Vermont for being the highest cost electricity for people and for people, businesses, whatever, to purchase. We used to be the highest cost of electricity of any state, including, and that today we are or today or last year or a couple of years ago, we reached the stage to be next to lowest cost of electricity per kilowatt hour of the New England states. So if we're going to be the next to the lowest, what's the number? What does it cost us per kilowatt hour for what we don't no longer have to buy?
So I just want to check before we go on, but do you feel like you have a clear enough sense of what we're asking for yet, or not quite there?
It sounds like Senator McDonald is looking for, and correct me if I'm wrong, how much more expensive would electricity be today if we hadn't made these efficiency investments?
Well, you say today, you mean is compared to the last 20 years? Or each year, we are theoretically reducing the amount of electricity, cost of electricity through efficiency. Each year, there is progress that is measurable. Please share us the vision.
Dollars. Okay. I think a lot of this data, it will be in the annual energy report that's forthcoming next Monday or Tuesday. And I can follow up with some specifics.
When we have those numbers, go back, I would like to ask, we talked about equity. And the savings for homeowners is different than for manufacturers or water pumpers or people who melt steel to make stoves. And I would hope we could learn whether the amount of money invested by homeowners and the savings that accrue to homeowners is similar to or different from other entities like commercial businesses, run freezers and melt steel and fried eggs. And to see if the savings is equitable based on their contributions to the fund that saves electricity.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator McDonald's bringing up a really important point, I think generally, and I wondered if we could request that we have Efficiency Vermont come in and describe some of their savings claims to us in a subsequent meeting, because this information I'm familiar with, but it is something that they are required to share, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get that answer today, and I'd love to.
Well, it sounds like, so there's a report coming, so maybe a way to proceed is get that report, look at that report, and we can reformulate the question. We also have the Efficiency Vermont and other actors in our jurisdiction come in and do some introductory stuff in the next 2 weeks. So I'm not trying to put this off, I'm just thinking, we have data coming and other witnesses, so let's make sure.
I'm making a big deal about it because I asked them every year and it's never laid out in front of us.
Yep, so we'll look at the report, you all can look at the report, and I want to make sure we're getting you the number that you're looking for. Like questions that I have a few numbers that I can follow up with, but if those are not responsive, I want to make sure we're giving you what it is that would be most helpful.
So the reason I ask is we're told, and I believe, that we use 15% less electricity, all the customers in the state than we used to use 22 years ago, or in that ballpark. And that's electricity that providers don't have to buy anymore through this program.
Yes, that's correct. We've offset some of the load growth that would have happened and dampened that and served that need with.
When you say low drip and dampened, people who are listening from the public to your answer go, what's that?
So just to slightly clarify what you said, it's not just comparing the load from 20 years ago. It's if 20 years ago was the starting point, load electric use in the state would have increased. And because of our investments in efficiency, we've been able to avoid that increase in load being electric use. So it's not that electric use is lower than it was 20 years ago. It's that we've avoided increases that we would have otherwise seen.
So you haven't had to build as many new poles and new wires and new transformers.
Exactly.
And all that money is no longer necessary to be spent because of efficiency Vermont, and that can be measured in kilowatt hours, the cost per kilowatt hour or kilowatts, not that people don't need to purchase anymore to fry their eggs or melt their steel.
Chairman McCormick?
I'm missing something here. It seems it's a very wordy question. What you're asking is how much electricity have we saved? And what is the cash value of that electricity? Isn't that,
What's the cash value of what?
what's the problem? What? Is that
What's the problem?
Yeah.
Well, if you can't answer that question and make a prediction and record it,
You can answer that question. Maybe not at this moment, but you go back to the office and you get on the computer and come back with how much has been saved. What's the cash value of it?
and what would the cost of electricity be if you had to build all the poles and wires that you don't have to build? And how much is that per kilowatt hour that?
Well, the cost of something that didn't happen is probably not an exact figure, but you can get a reasonable answer to that. I mean, that's, I don't see what,
Senator, it took 20 years to get this in place because getting a reasonable answer was very difficult, and people were skeptical that this was hocus pocus and not using as much electricity was going to simply deny people the ability to fry the eggs and melt steel and whatever. And lo and behold, we've gone from the most expensive in New England to the next to the lowest. I'm looking for the numbers to show where it came and how it works, and are some members of the electric users subsidizing others? Or is it equitable that the investment by this group of people has come back similarly to the investments by other users of electricity?
Thank you, sir.
So, thank you. We'll work on that. We're getting a report. We'll hear from Efficiency Vermont. I'm sure you'll be digging into your numbers. We'll keep at it until we have a. Okay, so I'm just mindful of the clock, and I want to make sure you have time to get through your presentation.
Whiz through these pretty quickly. For the record, Melissa Bailey, Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources with the Department of Public Service. I started at the department last March, so a little less than a year ago. I have about 20 years of experience in the energy field and holding positions with Efficiency Vermont, the Council of State Governments, and most recently, Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. So the efficiency division at the department, we're a staff of 7, including me. The slide shows a few areas of focus for our division. We have technical staff who do evaluation, measurement, and verification of these WEDI savings claim type numbers that we were just getting into. We're responsible for building code updates. We We are designated as the State Energy Office by the Department of Energy. There is some annual funding that comes with that designation for initiatives and projects and as referenced for staffing as well. To fill other priorities of the department. It's also worth noting that we do have involvement in transportation as it relates to electrification, so electrifying our transportation sector, and that's specifically around rate design, what sort of rates should be offered for electric vehicle charging, and specifically issues of load management and how do we pursuant to the conversations about the grid, how do we manage additional load to minimize costs, grid-related costs going forward. So just speaking about the efficiency utilities, as a reminder, I think everyone on the committee knows we have 3 regulated efficiency utilities in the state. That's Efficiency Vermont, serving most of the state with the exception of Burlington. Burlington Electric provides their own efficiency programs. Just to provide some context on spending, Efficiency Vermont's budget for the current year is roughly $55 million. Burlington Electric's is just under $3 million, and Vermont Gas's annual budget for this year is about $5.7 million. So that gives a scale of the ratepayer funding for these efficiency investments. Those budgets are set every 3 years in a PUC process. It's called the Demand Resources Plan proceeding. It's just begun to get underway currently for planning for the 2024 to 2026 time period. And the PUC is directed to set the energy efficiency charge for each of those entities at a level that is adequate to acquire all reasonably cost-effective energy savings for the state. So that's state policy as it relates to the EEC. And it's also worth noting, I think the committee is aware that the majority of these investments are on the electric side, are around electric efficiency. So of that, 68 million or so in spending, only about 14 million goes towards thermal efficiency services, and that would be mostly Vermont Gas, and Burlington Electric and Efficiency Vermont do have a smaller budget, statutorily designated funding sources that go towards thermal efficiency services.
Quick question on Vermont Gas, since they're not selling electricity but gas, what qualifies as a saving measure? Do they have to reduce? Are they doing something analogous like reducing gas consumption? Does that mean more efficient gas burning appliances, or are they? Yeah. So what are their options for how they, and what's their target that they need to hit? It's gas reduction.
So I don't know their target as a percentage of what current gas consumption is in the state, but the types of measures they would incentivize would be, like you said, more efficient gas appliances, on the commercial side, more efficient processes, industrial processes, and then of course on the residential side, a big component of what they do is weatherization, so tightening the shell to reduce the gas consumption for the home.
Sarah Watson.
I'm just looking at that list, wondering where Global Foundries fits into that. I mean, they just became their own efficiency utility or something like that.
They pump that question to TJ.
They became a self-managed utility, so not an efficiency utility, but kind of like, but well, it's a unique thing. It's not like anything else, but it is mainly on the power supply side that they do need to continue to make investments in. They need to comply with a renewable energy standard. Sorry.
It's okay.
And they, they need to continue to pay taxes as if they, into our gross receipts tax to support our weatherization programs. But I'm not sure if they actually continue to pay an efficiency charge, because it would all be coming back to just Global Foundries. They have they're a self-managed utility with one customer that is self-owned. So I can follow up on that on the efficiency portion.
We can get you the numbers on that. But Global Foundries is sort of in a class by itself when it comes to efficiency work. They were the original pilot for funding their own efficiency work. I want to say to the tune of $1 million. I'm not sure, but we'll get back to you on that. Point being that they have a specific efficiency program that they are themselves implementing and undertaking to make their processes energy efficient. This is a special statute that you folks passed many years ago.
Right, thank you for jogging my memory. I can actually speak to it now if that's helpful. It's called the Self-Managed Energy Efficiency Program, and they need to continue to comply with that as if they were not their own self-managed utility and part of Green Mountain Power. And as Commissioner said, that it's there's a required level of annual investment in energy efficiency programs, and we do. They have compliance reports, and we need to verify that they've actually made those investments and are saving energy.
And so, for both Global Foundries and for all these other folks, it's the Department of Public Service that would check to make sure that folks are meeting the renewable energy standard.
Yes, and the efficiency requirements.
And the efficiency, yes. Okay, thank you. All right.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. That's it. Thanks, TJ.
Yeah.
Big part of what we
Thank you,
do is
Commissioner.
verification. Decision plans. And just really quickly to the question Senator McCormick had earlier about, I'm sorry, Senator, had about equity among ratepayers in different commercial class or different customer classes. Those are some of the topics that are worked through in this demand resources plan proceeding. In general, there are requirements and targets that require Efficiency Vermont to direct roughly proportional spending back to the commercial sector that ties back to the investments that those customers make through their energy efficiency charges. That's how we get at equity, and there are similar requirements around low-income customers in the state to ensure that investments in efficiency are equitably distributed, and the spending ties to the EEC collections, the energy efficiency charge collections.
One of the challenges that has come up is, especially from BIP's work, was smaller utilities didn't necessarily feel like they were getting sort of their share of the total energy efficiency charge pie. If we've made progress on that sort of geographic and utility level distribution.
Yes, there was the previous demand resources plan proceeding. So the current one that we're in now, that was set as a metric that there's this geographic equity. There had previously been a geographic equity requirement around county distribution benefits, and now there's an additional one related to distribution utility equity, so that utilities need to get proportionally what they're putting in. Their customers need to basically get that money back spending. So the next topic is Tier 3. DJ mentioned the renewable energy standard passed Act 56 in 2015. Again, noting that the majority of our investment has previously been on the electric side, electric efficiency measures. The legislature did assign distribution utilities this additional requirement to acquire fossil fuel reductions from their customers, which is largely in the transportation and thermal sector, so straying outside of the electric sector. To spur some additional investment there. This is the most recent year of compliance that we have from our distribution utilities, the 17 distribution utilities around the state. And it just illustrates, you can see on your paper copy, the types of measures and programs that utilities are offering and where they're getting those fossil fuel reductions and the accompanying greenhouse gas reductions. As you'll see, almost half, actually a little bit more comes from heat pumps, coal plant heat pumps, when you add in the commercial sector. And these are primarily electrification programs, although they don't have to be. They can be strictly thermal programs that reduce fossil fuel use. And a lot of these programs are offered jointly between the efficiency utilities and the distribution utilities to provide seamless experience for customers.
Sarah?
Thank you, Chairman. Clarification, when you're looking at geothermal, I'm assuming that's the ground source heat pumps, or is that?
Well, moving quickly, I've just got a couple more slides. Building energy codes. My division is responsible for doing the updates to those on the commercial and residential side every 3 years. Again, the intent here being to approve the fitness of the building stock right off the bat when it's being built, and ensuring that the codes require cost-effective increases in energy efficiency of our buildings, so that occupants' overall operating costs would be lower than they would have otherwise been.
Is the department involved in any way in enforcement?
No. There's not currently an enforcement mechanism for building codes.
There was.
The residential building energy standards in the commercial version. That is, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding something correctly. So they're both about energy efficiency standards for buildings. They don't specify heat sources.
Essentially, they set standards for overall energy consumption for the building. And so there's different pathways that a builder could use to meet the energy standard. So putting in a more efficient heating system could help with that. Putting in a more efficient shell could help with that. So there's some degree where you can have a package of measures and they can offset each other. You could have slightly less efficient heating and more efficient shell. Does that make sense? Or you could have.
Yes, right. And so in that, you can have a more efficient heating system. It might be a part of the puzzle in the overall energy consumption of a building.
Exactly.
Is that like per square foot? Is it?
Yes, it's like the energy usage intensity per square foot.
Okay. And okay, that's interesting.
I could have my technical staff dive into the codes a little more too.
No, that's okay. Just so you know what's going on in my head with that question is that I'm interested in allowing municipalities to voluntarily opt into requiring, for example, no fossil fuels in new construction. And so because the residential building energy standards don't necessarily specifically address fuel type, that would be sort of separate from the RDES. Like anything about regulating, maybe that's a Ledge Council question, I don't know. But it would be separate from regulating the overall energy consumption of the building.
Yes, I think the code could theoretically be designed to prohibit fossil fuel consumption, but it's not. That's not consistent with where we are now.
Right.
And if you probably heard the concerns expressed by, we hear the concerns from the building community on inconsistency among codes across the state.
Yeah.
So there's that consideration to balance.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, recognizing we're short on time, I just wanted to give a quick report out, a reminder to the committee on 67 million that was included in last year's budget and climate investments. These are ARPA funds that were slated to flow through the department. So 35 million in investment in moderate weatherization is flowing through Efficiency Vermont. They expect to be able to weatherize roughly an additional 3,000 homes in addition to what they would have already done under programs. 20 million to support home electric upgrades for low and moderate income households. This is in recognition that we're estimating between a quarter and a half of Vermont homes really don't have the electric service that can accommodate electrification of either by installing heat pump water heaters, or electric vehicles. So there's this additional need that customers have to have some additional financial support for upgrading their panels and the electric infrastructure within the home, because otherwise trying to make the electrification switch was really cost prohibitive for a lot of households.
Per home, yeah. Or per family.
Individual
Yeah.
single family homes or multi-unit homes that can't accommodate additional load without a significant upgrade. The upgrades can be 3,000 to 5,000 to get your panel upgraded, your actual home infrastructure upgraded. So somebody goes to buy a vehicle and then they're suddenly hit with this new cost that was unanticipated.
How about from the house out? So you mean a new service line, you mean a transformer, what happens on the utility side?
We're still digging into that a little bit with our utilities. In most cases, what happens, we call that in front of the meter is the utility infrastructure, and behind the meter is the home infrastructure, the homeowner's infrastructure. For the most part, the utilities are covering that investment in transformers, but not exclusively, and we are working with the utilities on that.
Second one?
Thanks. So that's the individual. What about the system? Is the system, I guess a separate question. I guess the system is equipped now for the present demand. That's one question, is it? Secondly, what do we expect the demand to be if all goes according to plan? And are we on pace with the system to be able to supply the demand?
Yeah, and so I think that's getting into a little bit of what TJ was discussing, the transmission system, we do think has capacity to accommodate the added load, at least going out about 10 years, I think, from the last report I heard from Delco. But the distribution system where you're talking about transformers, there is the need to upgrade that infrastructure. And in many cases, the utility is covering those costs associated with load growth. And the economics oftentimes work out for the utility because then they're selling additional electricity. So they're able to make those investments and bear those costs.
They're selling additional electricity.
When you add a new electric load like a heat pump or an EV.
Oh, what's the difference between a heat pump and an EV when it comes to the economics?
For the customer or?
For the utility, for the poles and wires that are needed.
Those would both show up as additional load for the utility.
I'm trying to
It's
answer.
like TJ Ford.
I'm trying to get an answer that I know the answer
I
to.
thought that might be the case.
But, well, that's, you're the planners, you're the ones that should be able to explain that to us.
I'm not sure I'm understanding your
Without-
question. It sounds like TJ might be able to hop in if that's helpful.
Utilities, when they buy electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they get a big discount on the cost of the electricity. Is that correct?
Utilities purchase at wholesale, so they purchase from generators or through contracts. I wouldn't call that.
If they buy 24 hours a day versus I want to only buy between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, do they have to pay different rates?
There are different rates depending on which time of day you're purchasing electricity, and also if you have a long-term contract, say over 10 or 15, 20 years versus buying for the next day. So there's a lot of variables on that.
If you buy during peak demand hours, you pay a heck of a lot more, do you not?
Right.
When during the day, do utilities have no trouble selling the electricity they have bought 24/7?
So loads are typically lowest in the overnight hours, right? And that would be the off-peak time. So I'm not sure what you're getting at is.
So what happens to the electricity that you've purchased that you can't sell?
Well, they typically wouldn't be, they know, the utilities know when load will show up. So they would be purchasing less in the overnight hours and more.
But if they're buying it 24/7, they have to buy it in the overnight hours.
Yeah, they typically would only buy 24/7 for the load they know that they will have. So their purchases are much lower in the off-peak than in the on-peak.
So share with us the advantage that EVs provide utilities based on what we've just discussed.
Sure, thank you for that question. So electric vehicles are what we think of as a flexible resource. So they can charge on the overnight hours. Typically, if somebody comes home from work, they can plug in and charge overnight and build that load that's typically low for the utilities, essentially flatten the load around the clock for the utilities.
So it's a practical matter, utilities can sell electricity that no one wants to buy.
They can sell more electricity during the off-peak hours. And typically that, oftentimes the trend now is that that's coming with slightly discounted rates from the utilities for that electric vehicle charging electricity.
I know what this, Senator McCarthy was not.
Right, that's my name was on my question. Okay, so the individual, the consumer, we're ready for, or we're on pace to be ready for the consumer. And we are, did I misunderstand your answer?
You don't wanna, so this 20 million will be a big help for the consumer. I wouldn't say that it's gonna meet the need on the consumer level. Is that?
Okay, yeah, well, I hear pretty much daily from some angry citizen, you idiots haven't thought about this, have you?
Yes.
But where are you gonna get the electricity for your precious electric bill? So we're not idiots, we have thought about it. I'm just, okay, and I know you've thought about it. What, I'm looking at this, the consumer is gonna be demanding more. Will we have the supply for the consumer? Then there is the distribution. You said that we're on pace to upgrade for that. And then also generation. Are we either generating enough or are we on pace?
When?
Fundamentally, we got this great idea that we're gonna shift to cleaner electricity. Are we doing the infrastructural stuff necessary to do that?
So I'm gonna say that I don't have concerns that we will be able to purchase or generate the electricity. I don't have concerns on the power supply side, but I do want to give TJ an opportunity to jump in since that is his purview.
Yes, I agree with that. That's correct.
So I think the infrastructure questions are the more interesting and relevant ones about the home infrastructure, the distribution system infrastructure, which, you know, our utilities need to manage, and then ultimately the transmission infrastructure that Belco and the other transmission entities in the region manage. I think all of those are good questions to be asking, and those are where we'll need additional investment. We don't have concerns that we won't be able to purchase or procure the power. There are resources coming out around the region that will be able to fill that need. And ISO is planning for that. You know, I think they're saying 50% load growth by 2050. I mean, they're planning to need more power.
We're gonna need a lot more detail going forward, but right now, second week of the term, that's my question. That was what I asked.
Okay.
So I think especially, we'll be coming back to all these things in more depth, but it's, you know, this committee is always tempted to dip in deeper than the introduction. So, and we're gonna have ISO and Velco in the committee later this month. Just so that everyone knows, okay? Senator Moss?
Just very quickly, how does this program define low and moderate incomes? How do you check?
Sure. So I'm trying to remember if that was in statute, but low income is defined as under 80% of area median income, and that's we really strive to have consistency among income definitions, as I'm sure you're aware. So that's under 80% of AMI. Those customers can be served through the Weatherization Assistance Program through the Office of Economic Opportunity, and then moderate income is the next tranche up, and that's up to 120% of AMI. So that's consistent for all these.
And who checks that?
That is being still TBD. For a lot of programs, like the tier 3 programs the utilities offer, those are self-verified. The Weatherization Assistance Program for under 80, they are doing income verification, but this is kind of an open issue right now. We welcome guidance on that, but self-verification is permissible under the funds. And that's been that's where we're leading at this point, customer self-verification.
Thank you.
I said that it's coming down the road. There are more federal funds coming and more questions around income verification. So it is something that we're going to need to flesh out.
For your last bullet on that page, the 7 million.
Sure.
What's that amount? Support storage installation and load management. So who's managing what with that's well, like what's the kind of projects you're supporting?
Sure. So we're intending to support some battery installations for low and moderate income households, maybe 250 to 300 installs, covering either the full cost or very close to the full cost. Yeah, this was the statutory language on this piece is very interesting, or the budget language, but also supporting, so we also expect to make investments in load management platforms themselves for municipals and cooperative utilities that don't already have load management programs. So again, getting back to the point about the need to manage when load shows up on the grid. Some utilities don't currently have active programs. There's expenses to setting up those programs and buying the IT software necessary. So we expect to make some funds available for that. And then most likely there's also a call out for municipal storage facility installations for resiliency reasons. So we expect to allocate a little bit of money for that, for a slightly small, larger scale storage, 1 or 2 installations that would be in a municipal, associated with a municipal property.
So these subsidized storage installations, are they going to be under? Is there a requirement that they're under DU management so that DU can use it for like load shaping? Or
That would be the intent, that they participate in whatever program their utility is offering, and also provide resiliency benefits to the customer.
one of the allocation I'm thinking about was I think there was $9 million community scale renewable energy. I don't know if the awards have been made for that or if you have RFPs out there.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. It was $10 million for affordable, clean renewable energy program, the ACRE program.
Okay.
And awards have been made to distribution utilities to develop low-income solar programs to increase access to renewable energy for their customers. I said solar, but one of the utilities is aiming to use a hydroelectric plant that they're going to refurbish in their territory.
Still,
Yes. Yep.
Who's, sorry.
still.
Stowe Electric, yeah. And so this program, we originally, when we proposed it, we had intended for it to be kind of a self-sustaining program. The ARPA rules actually didn't allow that because of some of the loan provisions in ARPA. So it was modified, and we talked about this last year in the session. It was modified, and essentially we're running 5 or 6 different pilots to see with different utilities to see what kind of renewable energy access type programs best serve customers, and at the same time we're supporting renewable energy while we do it.
Let's wait for 3-minute wrap here.
That's next good time. My final slide is on the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm sure there'll be many, many more conversations on this. This is just highlighting 2 buckets of funding that will be coming to Vermont through the State Energy Office. This is formula funding, so that's rather than competitive funding. We know that DOE will be sending roughly this amount to Vermont under 2 programs. One, the Homes program encourages comprehensive energy savings projects in households. And the incentive levels are tiered based on the amount of savings, so they need to save at least 20% of energy. And then there's an added incentive if you can save over 35%, so that would be a really deep energy savings project. And the incentives are also tiered based on income level under the Homes program. So that one largely will be able to fund additional weatherization as well as other projects. And then the high efficiency electric home rebate program, the electrification program, is point of sale discounts, and this one's going to be tricky to figure out, but it's really exciting. There's incentives up to $14,000 per household for putting in things like heat pump water heaters, electric stoves, and other appliances. And this one is income capped at 150% AMI. So the Homes program is eligible for everyone is eligible. The HERA does have an income cap, but again, that will encompass a pretty broad set of Vermont households.
How much total?
So for these 2, we were estimating 58 million. We just heard from DOE it might be slightly higher, maybe a little over 60 million. And these funds, just really quickly on the timing, we don't expect to receive the funds probably until 2024, and they need to be spent by 2031. So this is several years worth of funding.
And are there other Inflation Reduction Act funds that we're eligible for, but they're just competitive? Will the state be applying, or is that going to be DUs, or who does the applying for those other funds?
Yeah, so I think the other relevant bucket is funding through EPA rather than DOE, and that's the greenhouse gas reduction funds. Some of those are competitive, and I believe there are some formula funds that would probably flow through the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont. But there is this one bucket of 27 billion flowing through EPA that folks are closely applying green bank funding, and the state is ineligible. States are eligible to apply for up to 7 billion of that. There's 3 buckets within there. So yes, there's competitive funding, and yes, there's funding that state can apply for, as well as funding that other entities can apply for. And so we're participating in conversations around that, specifically around the green bank concept and financing for efficiency projects with other entities. Yeah.
I've asked JFO to help us understand the IRA implications. It seems like there's a lot of learning to do to figure it all out. So.
Yes, on our end as well, and as Commissioner, I think TJ alluded to, resources is a consideration. We are, trying to allocate some funds to have consultants help us with targeting, maximizing the amount of money that comes to Vermont, and making sure that the municipalities and the regions are also winning funding opportunities and have the resources again to go after the money. So it is a concern, the consideration.
Senator Watson,
Oh, well, so just looking at the, it's gonna be based on income level again, are there any provisions around how to check for this, or maybe we don't know yet?
This one is we don't know yet.
Okay.
DOE is formulating their guidance, so there's a lot of working groups.
Cool.
We're providing input to them, but it's a big question and all the states are wrestling with that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
we'll keep you posted.
Well, thanks for fitting in your introduction and answers a lot more questions. Anything else that we didn't ask about or you didn't get to yet, that you just want to at least put on the table for maybe a follow-up discussion?
I don't think so. Be happy to come back and respond.
So we'll follow up on the questions around savings that Senator McDonald was asking, and thank you. It's good to see you all again.